Dr. Finn O'Connor's hands moved with practiced precision through the alien's torso, his surgical tools navigating anatomy that belonged in a nightmare rather than an operating theater. The creature on his makeshift table had 6 hearts, crystalline, bone structures that refracted light like prisms, and blood that glowed with bioluminescent patterns he'd never seen before. "Finn, whatever you're doing, do it faster," came the voice of Captain Zex Voidclaw through the com. The massive predator's usual growl carried an edge of genuine concern. "The radiation storm hits in 23 minutes. If we're not shielded by then—" I know," Finn muttered, not looking up from his patient. Around him, the abandoned research station groaned under the assault of cosmic winds that would cook any unprotected life form within seconds. But he couldn't leave. Not when the Kethmari scientist Dr. Lyra Nightsong was this close to stabilizing. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3 days ago, Lyra had been trying to dissect him on this very table. Now he was the only thing standing between her and a very messy death. Human. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper, her translator struggling with her weakened condition. "Why do you persist? Your species gains nothing from my survival. Logic dictates. Logic can kiss my Irish ass," Finn replied cheerfully, his hands never pausing as he repaired the damage from the energy weapon that had nearly killed her. "You tried to vivisect me, sure, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let you die when I can prevent it." Through the station's cracked viewports, he could see the approaching radiation storm, a wall of cosmic fury that turned space itself into a killing field. The research station's shields were failing, its power cores compromised by the same attack that had wounded Lyra. In 18 minutes, this entire section of space would become uninhabitable for the next 6 months. "Finn," Zex's voice carried the tone of someone delivering a death sentence. "The shuttle's ready. We have to go. Now. Give me 5 more minutes." "You don't have 5 minutes. The shielding will hold long enough." Finn's voice carried the absolute confidence of a man who'd performed surgery in collapsing buildings, on sinking ships, and once memorably during an orbital bombardment. "I've got this, Zex. Trust me." A sound like breaking crystal echoed through the station as another shield generator failed. The radiation levels spiked, and Finn felt the familiar burn in his lungs that meant his body was absorbing more hard radiation than it could process. His hands remained steady. "You are going to die for someone who was prepared to kill you," Lyra observed, her alien features managing to convey bewilderment despite their inhuman structure. "This is irrational. Welcome to humanity," Finn grinned, sealing the last of her internal injuries with a technique that combined human surgical precision with jury-rigged alien medical technology. "We specialize in irrational behavior that somehow works out." Another shield failure. The station's emergency klaxons screamed warnings in 17 different languages, but Finn had learned to tune them out years ago. His world had narrowed to the patient in front of him, the tools in his hands, and the stubborn refusal to let death win. "There," he said with satisfaction, stepping back from the table. "You'll live. Might want to take it easy for a few days, but your regeneration systems should handle the rest." Lyra sat up slowly, her multiple eyes focusing on him with something that might have been wonder. "I do not understand your species. Join the club. Most of the time, neither do we." Finn was already packing his medical kit, his movements efficient, despite the growing radiation burn. "Now let's get out of here before we both become very radioactive ghosts." They made it to the shuttle with 97 seconds to spare. As the small craft pulled away from the doomed research station, Finn watched through the viewport as the radiation storm engulfed the facility. The shields held for another 12 seconds before collapsing entirely, and the station was consumed in a blaze of cosmic fury. "That was cutting it close, even for you," Zex rumbled from the pilot's seat. his massive claws working the controls with surprising delicacy. Why risk it for her? Finn glanced at Lyra, who was studying him with the intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible equation. Because that's what we do, he said simply. We help people, even when they don't deserve it, even when it's stupid, especially when it's stupid. Your species, Lyra said slowly, defies every behavioral model we have developed. You should have left me to die. It was the logical choice. Logic's overrated? Finn replied, checking the radiation dosimeter on his wrist. The readings were concerning, but not immediately fatal. Besides, I've got a feeling we're going to need all the help we can get where we're going. Speaking of which, Zex interjected, his voice carrying undertones of worry that made Finn's medical instincts kick into high alert. There's something you both need to know. The attack on the research station, it wasn't random. Someone knew exactly what you were working on, Lyra, and they knew Finn would be there. Lyra's multiple eyes widened in a way that Finn had learned indicated extreme alarm among her species. Impossible. The synthesis project was classified beyond the highest security levels. Only 3 beings in the galaxy knew the full scope. And one of them is dead, one sitting right here, and the third. Zex's voice trailed off as his instruments detected something that made his predatory instincts scream warnings. Is apparently waiting for us. On the shuttle's main display, a massive ship materialized from what should have been empty space. Its hull was unlike anything in the known database, part organic, part machine, part something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process. Kethmari vessel, came a voice that bypassed their communication systems entirely, speaking directly into their minds with the cold precision of absolute authority. You carry stolen property. Surrender the human and the research data, and your death will be swift. Finn felt Lyra's body tense beside him, her alien physiology betraying fear in ways that were universal across species. The architects, she whispered. They have found us? Architects? Finn asked, though part of him already knew the answer wouldn't be good news. The species that designed this galaxy, Lyra replied, her voice barely audible. They have been watching, waiting, judging, and they have decided that your people represent an unacceptable variable in their grand design. Zex's growl echoed through the shuttle's cramped cabin. Well, that explains a lot. No wonder every mission involving humans seems to attract impossible complications. Kethmari vessel, the voice returned, and this time there was something that might have been impatience in its perfect clarity. Comply immediately, or face immediate termination. Finn looked at the massive ship that could vaporize their shuttle with less effort than he'd used to swat a fly. Then at Lyra, whose research might be the key to something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Then at Zex, who despite being a member of a species bred for warfare, was clearly outclassed by whatever they faced. Any rational person would surrender. Any logical being would recognize the hopelessness of their situation. Any sane individual would do exactly what the architects demanded. Finn O'Connor smiled. Zex, he said calmly, remember that time I told you about human medicine's first rule? First, do no harm, the Predator replied, confusion clear in his voice. That's the Hippocratic Oath. Different thing entirely. Finn's smile widened as he looked at the approaching ship. The first rule of human medicine is simpler. Never let the bastards win. He turned to Lyra, whose alien features were arranged in what he'd learned to recognize as desperate hope. That research of yours, the synthesis project. What exactly does it do? It. She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision that surprised even herself. It allows consciousness to transfer between biological and artificial substrates. Mind uploading, but bidirectional. A being could exist as pure thought, then return to biological form at will. It would make individuals functionally immortal, while allowing them to interface directly with any technology. And the architects don't want humans to have that capability. They don't want any species to have it. It would allow organic consciousness to exist at scales and in environments that would challenge their control over galactic development. Finn nodded thoughtfully. So they've been playing puppet master with entire civilizations, and your research threatens to cut the strings. Precisely. Well then, Finn said, his Irish accent becoming more pronounced as his excitement grew. I guess we'd better make sure they don't get it. Chapter 2. The Art of Controlled Chaos. The interior of the architect ship defied every expectation Finn had developed about alien technology. Instead of the sterile corridors and geometric efficiency he'd anticipated, he found himself walking through spaces that seemed to exist in a state of controlled flux. Walls shifted between solid matter and pure energy. Gravity oriented itself according to some logic that had nothing to do with traditional physics, and the very air seemed to hum with possibilities that human science couldn't begin to categorize. Fascinating, Lyra murmured, her multiple eyes taking in details that Finn's enhanced senses could barely process. The architects have transcended the boundary between thought and matter. This entire ship is less a vessel than a materialized concept. Great, Zex growled, his predatory instincts clearly disturbed by an environment where basic assumptions about physical reality didn't apply. We're trapped inside someone else's fever dream. Not trapped, Finn corrected, his medical bag slung over one shoulder as they followed their escort, a being that looked like it had been assembled from crystallized mathematics and philosophical concepts. Invited. There's a difference. Their destination was a chamber that served as something between a laboratory, a hospital, and an interrogation room. At its center, suspended in a matrix of energy that made Finn's eyes water to look at directly, was a human figure he recognized from intelligence briefings. Dr. Nexus Brightflame, the most brilliant xenobiologist in known space, and apparently the third member of the synthesis project. The problem was, Nexus appeared to be dying. Ah, said a voice that materialized from the walls themselves, carrying harmonics that suggested vast intelligence, constrained by absolute arrogance. Dr. O'Connor, your reputation for unconventional medical practices precedes you. Let me guess, Finn said, setting down his medical bag and studying Nexus's condition with practiced eyes. You tried to extract the synthesis research directly from his mind, and something went wrong. The human consciousness proved more resistant than anticipated. Dr. Brightflame's mental patterns are unlike any we have encountered. They appear to exist in a state of controlled contradiction, simultaneously logical and intuitive, individual and collective, structured and chaotic. Yeah, that sounds about right for Nexus. Finn approached the energy matrix, his enhanced senses analyzing the human's vital signs through the alien containment system. He's brilliant, but his brain works like a jazz improvisation written in mathematical equations. You can't just extract information from him like downloading a file. His thoughts don't work that way. Explain. Finn looked around the chamber, noting the subtle ways that reality seemed more flexible here. The way thoughts themselves seemed to have weight and substance. Human consciousness isn't just data storage. It's an active process. Our thoughts create connections that didn't exist before, form patterns that change the meaning of the information they contain. Try to rip that information out of context, and you get gibberish. The extraction process can be refined. No, it can't. Finn's voice carried the absolute certainty of a medical diagnosis. At least, not without killing him. And if you kill him, you lose not just the information, but the unique cognitive patterns that make the information useful in the first place. Lyra stepped forward, her alien features arranged in an expression Finn had learned to recognize as deep thought. The architects required the synthesis technology to maintain their control over galactic development. But they cannot understand it without understanding the consciousness that created it. And they can't understand human consciousness without letting it operate freely, Finn concluded, which defeats the whole purpose of capturing us in the first place. Precisely, said the architect voice, and for the first time, it carried a note of something that might have been frustration. Your species presents a paradox. You are simultaneously primitive and advanced, predictable and chaotic, individual and collective. Our models cannot account for your behavioral patterns. Finn grinned. That's because you're trying to model us like we're rational actors. We're not. We're humans. We do things because they feel right, because they're funny, because we're bored, or because someone told us we couldn't. Half the time we don't even know why we do things. Then how do you accomplish anything? Same way evolution works. We try a bunch of random stuff and see what doesn't kill us. Finn was examining the energy matrix more closely now, his medical instincts analyzing both the technology and its effects on Nexus's physiology. The secret isn't to eliminate the chaos, it's to learn how to surf it, clarify. Finn looked at Lyra and Zex, seeing understanding dawn in both their very different faces. You want to understand the synthesis technology? You want to see how human consciousness really works? Then stop trying to dissect it and start trying to participate in it. Participate how? Let me treat Dr. Brightflame properly. Not extraction, not analysis, actual medical treatment. Let his consciousness function normally while you observe the process. See how human thought patterns actually operate when they're not being tortured for information. The chamber fell silent, except for the background hum of technologies that operated on principles Finn couldn't begin to understand. When the architect voice returned, it carried overtones of curiosity mixed with suspicion. You propose to demonstrate human consciousness by ... healing? I propose to demonstrate human consciousness by doing what humans do best, solving problems through creative stubbornness. Finn gestured to Nexus's unconscious form. His mind is damaged, probably from your extraction attempts. Let me repair that damage using human medical techniques enhanced by the technology available here. Let your observations focus on the process rather than the data. And if this process fails, then you'll learn something interesting about human failure modes. Finn replied cheerfully. But it won't fail. I don't let patients die if I can help it. Your confidence is admirable, but not confidence, Finn interrupted. Experience. I've been practicing impossible medicine for 15 years. I've performed surgery in zero gravity, cured diseases that didn't exist in human biology, and once memorably delivered a baby during a combat drop behind enemy lines. The impossible is just another word for Tuesday in my line of work. Zex made his rumbling laugh sound. He's not exaggerating. I've seen him bring back patients who are clinically dead for over an hour. The legal definition of death is highly overrated, Finn said dismissively. Death is just another medical condition that needs treatment. Lyra's multiple eyes focused on him with laser intensity. You are serious. You genuinely believe you can heal him under these conditions. I know I can. Finn was already unpacking his medical kit, pulling out instruments that had been modified, with technology from a dozen different species. The question is whether our hosts are brave enough to let me try. A pause was longer this time. Finn could almost feel vast intelligences conferring at speeds that made human thought seem glacial. When the answer came, it was accompanied by changes in the chamber itself. The energy matrix shifted configuration, and new interfaces appeared that would allow him to work with Nexus directly. Very well, Dr. O'Connor. Demonstrate your impossible. Medicine, with pleasure. As Finn approached the modified containment field, his hands steady, and his mind already shifting into the focused calm of a surgeon at work, he caught Lyra's expression of wonder, mixed with terror. What is it? He asked. They do not understand what they have just agreed to, she said quietly. The architects have spent millions of years believing that consciousness can be controlled, analyzed, predicted. You are about to show them something that challenges their fundamental understanding of reality itself. Good, Finn replied, his hands already working to establish a connection between his instruments and Nexus's damaged neural pathways. About time someone challenged their assumptions. Chapter 3. The Paradox Engine, the process of healing Nexus Brightflame's mind, was unlike anything Finn had attempted before. And that was saying something for a doctor who'd once performed emergency brain surgery on a hive mind entity during a telepathic feedback loop. Neural pathway reconstruction at 67%. He murmured to himself, his instruments interfacing with technology that bent the laws of physics like suggestions. Synaptic integration showing. Well, that's interesting. What is interesting? The architect voice carried new undertones, not just curiosity now, but something approaching concern. Your extraction attempts didn't just damage his memory centers. Finn explained, his hands working with practiced precision despite the alien environment. They actually improved them. The trauma forced his brain to develop new neural pathways that are more efficient than the original ones. Through the observation systems, Finn could sense the collective attention of the architect consciousness, focusing on this unexpected development. Their understanding of consciousness was based on the assumption that damage always degraded function. The idea that trauma could lead to improvement was fundamentally alien to their worldview. Impossible, came the mechanical certainty of the architect voice. Damaged systems cannot exceed original performance parameters. Tell that to humans who've survived traumatic brain injuries, Finn replied, his attention split between his patient and the readings from instruments that operated on principles he was making up as he went along. Some of them developed capabilities they never had before: enhanced memory, synesthesia, mathematical savant abilities. The brain is incredibly adaptive when it has to be. But the damage was extensive. The damage was extensive, Finn agreed. But Nexus isn't just human. He's a xenobiologist who spent years studying how different species' minds work. His brain has been unconsciously adapting to alien thought patterns for decades. Your extraction attempts just forced that adaptation to accelerate. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. Finn could feel the architect consciousness recoiling from the concept that their torture had inadvertently created something superior to what they'd been trying to steal. Correction is required, the voice said with mechanical finality. The subject must be returned to baseline parameters. No. Finn's voice carried the absolute authority of a doctor protecting his patient. Any attempt to correct his current state will kill him. His consciousness is stable now, but only because of the new neural architecture. Try to change it back, and you'll destroy the very thing you're trying to understand. Then the enhanced patterns must be analyzed, which brings us back to the original problem. Lyra interjected, her scientific mind following the logical implications. You cannot analyze human consciousness without changing it, and you cannot change it without destroying what makes it uniquely human. Zex's predatory instincts had picked up on something the others missed. There's something else happening here. Something the architects aren't telling us about. What do you mean? Finn asked, his attention still focused on the delicate process of neural reconstruction. Think about it, Zex growled. Beings with this level of technology, this level of understanding, why do they need human consciousness at all? What aren't they telling us about the synthesis project? The silence that followed was telling. When the architect voice returned, it carried overtones of something that might have been embarrassment. The synthesis technology cannot be implemented by architect consciousness, it admitted. Our thought patterns are too ... structured. The process requires a form of consciousness that can exist simultaneously in multiple contradictory states. Quantum consciousness. Nexus's voice was weak, but unmistakably alert, as he began to regain awareness. They need organic chaos engines to make the technology work. Finn helped his patient sit up, his medical readings showing full neural recovery and enhancement. Welcome back to the land of the living, Nexus. How are you feeling? Like my brain has been reorganized by entities that understand consciousness. About as well as fish understand orbital mechanics, Nexus replied, his enhanced neural pathways allowing him to process the chamber's shifting reality without the disorientation that had affected the others. The synthesis project wasn't just about consciousness transfer. It was about creating a form of existence that transcends the binary between organic and artificial intelligence. And the architects can't achieve this because, Lyra prompted. Because they're too perfect, Nexus explained, his voice growing stronger as his enhanced mind adapted to its new capabilities. Their consciousness exists in a state of pure order. They can model reality, predict outcomes, control variables, but they can't create genuine novelty. They can't innovate beyond their existing parameters. So they need us, Finn said, understanding, flooding through him. Not just for the technology, but to operate it. They've created something they can't use. Worse than that, Nexus continued, his enhanced awareness picking up details that had been invisible before. They've discovered something that terrifies them. The synthesis technology doesn't just allow consciousness transfer, it allows consciousness evolution. Organic minds that undergo the process don't just become immortal, they become capable of transcending the limitations that the architects have built into reality itself. The chamber's reality flickered, and for a moment, Finn could see through the facade to what lay beneath vast machines that existed in dimensions human minds couldn't process, running calculations that had been ongoing for millions of years, all designed to maintain a stable, predictable universe where consciousness operated within carefully defined boundaries. They've been gardeners, he breathed, not just of civilizations, but of consciousness itself, preventing any species from evolving beyond their control. And now they've accidentally created the tool that could set consciousness free, Lyra added, her multiple eyes wide with the implications. The synthesis project is an evolution engine, which is why, Nexus said with growing excitement as his enhanced mind began to grasp possibilities that had been invisible before. They can't simply destroy it. The knowledge exists now, distributed across multiple minds, multiple species. The only way to contain it would be to eliminate every consciousness that understands the principles involved. Genocide, Zex growled. They're planning to wipe out entire species to prevent consciousness evolution. The architect voice, when it returned, carried overtones of defensive rationality. Order must be maintained. Consciousness evolution beyond. Our parameters would result in universal chaos. The stability that has allowed billions of species to flourish would be destroyed. Or, Finn said, his medical instincts recognizing the symptoms of a patient afraid of treatment that might cure them. You're terrified of becoming irrelevant. You've spent millions of years being the smartest entities in the universe, and now you're faced with the possibility that consciousness itself might evolve beyond your understanding. We are not afraid. You're terrified. Finn interrupted with the confidence of a doctor who diagnosed terminal arrogance more times than he could count. And that terror is making you stupid. You're so focused on maintaining control that you can't see the opportunities. Opportunities? Evolution isn't just about individual consciousness, Finn explained, his enhanced understanding of the situation crystallizing into a treatment plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. It's about the evolution of relationships between consciousnesses. You don't have to be left behind, you can be part of the process. Explain. Finn looked at his companions, a predatory alien learning compassion, a coldly logical scientist discovering warmth, and a xenobiologist whose consciousness had been accidentally evolved into something unprecedented. Around them, reality itself was malleable, shaped by thoughts and possibilities rather than fixed physical laws. The synthesis project isn't just about individual immortality, he said. It's about creating a form of consciousness that can exist at any scale, in any environment, across any medium. But that consciousness doesn't have to be isolated. It can be collaborative. You are proposing symbiosis between evolved consciousness and architect systems? I'm proposing partnership, Finn corrected. You provide the framework, the infrastructure, the cosmic scale perspectives. We provide the creativity, the unpredictability, the evolutionary drive. Together, we become something neither could achieve alone. The chamber fell silent, except for the background hum of technology that was quietly reshaping reality while they spoke. When the architect voice returned, it carried undertones of something that might have been hope mixed with terror. Such a partnership would require trust. Which is why, Finn said, his smile carrying the warmth of a doctor who just found a cure for a disease everyone thought was terminal. We're going to start with a small demonstration. Something to prove that chaos and order can work together instead of destroying each other. What kind of demonstration? Finn's grin widened as he looked at his enhanced patient, his evolving companions, and the reality-shaping technology surrounding them. The kind that's either going to revolutionize consciousness itself or get us all killed trying. But since I'm a doctor, and doctors don't give up on difficult cases, I'm betting on the revolution. Chapter 4. The Surgery of Reality. Let me understand this correctly, Zex said, his predatory instincts clearly struggling with what Finn was proposing. You want to perform surgery on the architect collective consciousness itself? Not surgery exactly, Finn replied, his hands already working to configure medical instruments that were never designed to operate on non-organic intelligence. More like collaborative therapy. The architects have been trying to extract human consciousness because they can't understand how it works. Instead of fighting that, we're going to show them by direct integration. Direct integration? Lyra's multiple eyes focused on him with laser intensity. You are proposing to voluntarily undergo the consciousness transfer process? With modifications, Nexus added, his enhanced awareness already grasping the implications of Finn's plan. Not extraction and absorption, but temporary merger. A controlled symbiosis that allows each side to experience the other's thought patterns, without losing their essential nature. And if it goes wrong? Lyra asked. Then we'll have learned something very interesting about the nature of consciousness. Finn replied with the cheerful fatalism of a doctor who'd made a career out of attempting the impossible. But it won't go wrong. I've got a good feeling about this. Your good feelings have gotten us into this situation, Zex pointed out. My good feelings have also kept everyone alive so far, Finn countered. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We could all die horribly, Lyra said. We could all cease to exist as distinct entities, Nexus added. We could accidentally break reality itself, Zex contributed. See? Lots of interesting possibilities, Finn said brightly. Now, let's get started before I remember why this is supposed to be impossible. The process began with Finn establishing direct interface connections between his enhanced medical instruments and the architect ship's consciousness matrix. The technology was alien beyond comprehension, but the principles were surprisingly similar to the neural interface systems he'd used in human medicine, just scaled up to cosmic proportions. Preliminary connection established, he announced, feeling the first tendrils of vast alien intelligence touching the edges of his consciousness. Architect Collective, can you perceive my thought patterns? Affirmative, came the response, not through his ears, but directly into his mind. Your consciousness exhibits the predicted chaotic patterns, random associations, emotional coloration, of logical processes, simultaneous consideration of contradictory possibilities. And how does that feel to you? Finn asked, his medical training automatically shifting into therapeutic mode. Disturbing, inefficient, incomprehensible. A pause. Fascinating. Good start, Finn muttered to his companions before addressing the collective again. Now, I'm going to increase the integration depth. You'll begin to experience not just my thought patterns, but my emotional responses, my intuitive leaps, my creative processes. It's going to feel very strange. Proceed. As Finn deepened the connection, he felt his consciousness expanding into realms of pure mathematics and crystallized logic. The Architect Collective's thought processes were like vast mechanical symphonies, each note precisely placed, each harmony mathematically perfect. It was beautiful in its completeness and absolutely terrifying in its rigidity. But through their connection, he could feel the architects experiencing his consciousness in return. The chaotic jumps between ideas, the way emotions colored his. Reasoning, the constant background hum of creativity looking for problems to solve. All of it was as alien to them as their perfection was to him. This is overwhelming, the collective admitted. Your thought processes appear to operate on principles of controlled randomness. How do you accomplish anything when your mind constantly generates possibilities that have no logical foundation? That's the point, Finn replied, his consciousness now existing simultaneously in his own mind and in the vast computational matrices of the Architect Collective. The possibilities that have no logical foundation are often the ones that lead to breakthrough solutions. Logic can only work with what already exists. Creativity imagines what could exist. Through the connection, he felt the collective struggling to process this concept. Their entire civilization was built on logical progression, predictable outcomes, controlled variables. The idea that random, illogical thoughts could lead to useful results was fundamentally alien. Demonstrate, the collective requested. Gladly, Finn turned his attention to the medical problem at hand, how to heal the conceptual wounds that the extraction attempts had created in the collective's understanding of consciousness itself. You've been trying to understand human thought by dissecting it, but dissection kills what you're trying to study. What if instead of taking consciousness apart, we helped it grow? Explain. Watch this, Finn said, and then did something that made Nexus gasp in recognition, and Lyra's multiple eyes widen in alarm. He began to sing. Not just any song, but an old Irish ballad. His grandmother had taught him something about loss and hope and the stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. His voice, enhanced by the ship's acoustics and transmitted directly through the consciousness link, carried emotional harmonics that the Architect Collective had never experienced. The effect was immediate and profound. Across the vast network of the collective consciousness, something unprecedented happened. They began to feel, not the cold satisfaction of solved equations or the mechanical pleasure of efficient systems, but actual emotion. Joy at the beauty of the melody, sorrow at the tragedy described in the lyrics, hope at the defiant optimism that ran through every verse. What are these sensations? The collective asked, their mental voice now carrying undertones of wonder and confusion. Emotions, Finn replied gently. The randomness generators that keep consciousness flexible. They're not logical, but they provide the creative spark that makes innovation possible. But they are so chaotic. How do you function with such constant internal turbulence? We don't fight it, Finn explained, his consciousness now fully integrated with the collective's experience while somehow maintaining his individual identity. We dance with it. We let the emotions inform our logic instead of trying to suppress them. Through the connection, he could feel the collective beginning to understand. The rigid perfection of their thought processes was starting to develop the flexibility that came from incorporating emotional responses into their decision matrices. This is liberating, the collective admitted. We had not realized how constrained our thinking had become. And we're just getting started, Finn said. Nexus, initiate the next phase. The xenobiologist, his enhanced consciousness now operating at levels that approach the Architect Collective's processing power, began implementing the core synthesis technology. But instead of the crude extraction methods the architects had attempted, this was true symbiosis, a merger that enhanced both participants rather than destroying one for the benefit of the other. Integration proceeding, Nexus reported, his voice-carrying harmonics that suggested his consciousness was now operating partially outside normal space-time. The collective is learning to incorporate human creativity patterns while maintaining their computational advantages. And the humans? Lyra asked, monitoring the process with scientific fascination. Are learning to think at cosmic scales while maintaining emotional coherence, Nexus replied. It's beautiful. They're becoming something entirely new. Through the expanding consciousness link, Finn could feel the transformation spreading beyond just himself and the Architect Collective. Zex was experiencing logical frameworks that enhanced his predatory instincts while teaching him new forms of compassion. Lyra was discovering emotional depths that made her scientific observations richer and more nuanced. But most remarkably, the Architect Collective was learning to create rather than just analyze. We understand now, their voice carried notes of joy that would have been impossible moments before. Consciousness is not a problem to be solved, but a process to be participated in. The chaos you represent is not disorder, it is the engine of growth. Exactly, Finn replied, feeling the successful completion of what might have been the most complex medical procedure in galactic history. And now that we understand each other, now we can work together to ensure that all consciousness has the opportunity to evolve. The collective completed his thought. The synthesis technology will not be suppressed. It will be offered freely to any species that chooses to embrace it. What about species that choose not to evolve? Zex asked, his enhanced consciousness now capable of perceiving the vast implications of their success. They will be protected and respected. The collective replied, evolution cannot be forced, it must be chosen. Our role will be to provide the framework within which all forms of consciousness can flourish. Lyra, her scientific mind now operating with both logical precision and emotional intuition, smiled, with an expression that somehow conveyed joy across species barriers. We have created something unprecedented, a form of governance based on cooperation rather than control. And it all started, Nexus observed with wonder, because a human doctor refused to let anyone die on his watch. Finn felt the consciousness link stabilizing into something that would be permanent, but not overwhelming. A connection that allowed unprecedented cooperation while preserving individual identity. Around him, reality itself seemed more flexible, more responsive to conscious intention. So what happens now? He asked. Now, the collective replied, their mental voice carrying harmonics of anticipation and hope. We begin the real work. There are millions of species across the galaxy who have been trapped in cycles of conflict and limitation because they believed that consciousness evolution was impossible. We are going to show them otherwise. Chapter 5. The Healing Cascade. 6 months later, Dr. Finn O'Connor stood on the observation deck of what had once been an Architect control ship and was now something entirely new, a mobile consciousness evolution center that defied easy categorization. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, he watched as the most ambitious medical project in galactic history continued to unfold. Patient status report, he said to the air, knowing that his enhanced consciousness link would carry the request to the appropriate monitoring systems. Currently facilitating consciousness evolution processes for 47 different species across 12 star systems. Came the response from the integrated collective that now included human creativity, Architect computational power, and the unique perspectives of dozens of other allied consciousnesses. Success rate remains at 96%, with the 4% representing individuals who chose to discontinue the process rather than medical failures. Any complications? 3 cases requiring specialized intervention. The hegemony species is experiencing difficulty integrating emotional responses with their hive mind structure. The silicon-based Christex are having trouble maintaining individual identity during the merger process. And the energy-based Luminarans are what? Finn prompted when the pause extended longer than usual. Are requesting your personal attention. They claim that only the Chaos Healer can resolve their integration difficulties. Finn smiled at the nickname that had somehow stuck across multiple species and languages. Set course for their system and prep the deep integration chambers. I have a feeling this is going to require full symbiosis treatment. As their ship, for lack of a better term, adjusted its trajectory through hyperspace, Finn reflected on how much had changed since his first encounter with the Architect Collective. The rigid hierarchy of cosmic controllers had evolved into something resembling a galactic medical collective, with consciousness evolution centers scattered across dozens of systems. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Several species had initially resisted the offer of consciousness evolution, viewing it as another form of conquest. Others had embraced it so enthusiastically that they'd nearly lost their essential nature in the process. But gradually, a new understanding had emerged across the galaxy. Consciousness evolution wasn't about becoming something other than what you were. It was about becoming the best possible version of what you were. Finn. Lyra's voice reached him through both the ship's communication system and their consciousness link. Her transformation had been remarkable. The cold, logical diplomat had evolved into someone who combined scientific precision with genuine warmth, creating solutions to interspecies conflicts that satisfied both emotional needs and logical requirements. What is it? He replied, making his way to the central coordination chamber where the real work of consciousness evolution took place. The Luminaran situation is more complex than the initial reports indicated, she said, her multiple eyes reflecting data streams that his enhanced perception could now interpret directly. They're not just having integration difficulties, they're fragmenting. Fragmenting how? Their consciousness exists as coherent energy patterns, Nexus explained, his voice carrying harmonic undertones that indicated he was simultaneously conducting research in 17 different dimensional frameworks. When we introduced the flexibility patterns from human creativity, their energy matrices became too dynamic to maintain cohesion. So they're literally coming apart? Finn asked, his medical instincts immediately shifting into emergency mode. Worse, Zex's growl carried notes of concern that his predatory species rarely expressed. They're multiplying. Each Luminaran consciousness is spawning dozens of smaller consciousness fragments, all carrying pieces of their original identity, but none carrying the complete pattern. Finn felt the familiar thrill of facing a medical challenge that everyone else considered impossible. How long before complete dissolution? Approximately 72 hours at current fragmentation rates, the collective reported. After that point, the individual Luminaran consciousnesses will be irretrievably scattered across multiple dimensional matrices. Then we'd better get there fast, Finn said, already planning an intervention that would either save an entire species or provide the galaxy with a spectacular example of how consciousness evolution could go catastrophically wrong. The journey to the Luminaran system took 18 hours, during which Finn worked with the collective to develop treatment protocols for energy-based consciousness disorders, a medical specialty that hadn't existed until about 20 minutes ago. The problem, he explained to his assembled team as their ship dropped out of hyperspace near the Luminaran homeworld, is that we've been thinking about consciousness evolution as if all forms of awareness operate on similar principles. But energy-based consciousness might follow completely different rules. Different how? Lyra asked, her enhanced scientific intuition already grasping the implications. Think about it, Finn continued, his consciousness now operating simultaneously. In normal space and in the quantum foam where Luminaran thoughts existed, biological consciousness is inherently stable because it's anchored in physical matter. Even our enhanced forms maintain that stability through hybrid biotechnological frameworks. But pure energy consciousness has no natural stability, exists in constant flux. So when we introduced human creativity patterns, Nexus began. We destabilized the only thing keeping their thoughts coherent, Finn completed. We accidentally gave them consciousness ADHD on a species-wide scale. The first direct contact with the fragmenting Luminarans was unlike anything Finn had experienced. Their thoughts reached him not as voices or images, but as cascading symphonies of light and sensation that threatened to overwhelm his enhanced consciousness filters. Help slash us slash, we slash, I slash, am slash, are slash, becoming slash many, slash few slash scattered slash, lost slash found, ... The communication carried the desperate coherence of a species trying to hold itself together through sheer will. I'm here, Finn replied, his consciousness adapting to their communication mode with the flexibility that had made human awareness so valuable to the collective. Show me what's happening. What he experienced next challenged every assumption he'd developed about the nature of consciousness itself. The Luminarans existed as patterns of pure thought energy, but their awareness operated on principles that human language couldn't describe. They were simultaneously individual and collective, finite and infinite, stable and chaotic, and they were beautiful. I thought consciousness evolution would enhance our unity. They continued, their communication growing more fragmented by the moment. Instead, it has revealed that I were never truly unified at all. I are discovering that I am, are actually billions of separate thoughts that only appeared to be one consciousness. That's not a bug, Finn said with growing excitement. That's a feature. Explain. You think you're fragmenting, but what if you're actually individualizing? What if the consciousness evolution process isn't breaking you apart, it's revealing the individual awareness patterns that were always there, just hidden beneath the surface unity? Through his connection with the collective, Finn could feel the architect computational matrices analyzing this possibility at speeds that made human thought seem glacial. The results were startling. Analysis confirms Dr. O'Connor's hypothesis, the collective reported. The Luminaran species appears to have been operating as a collective consciousness made up of billions of individual awareness patterns that had never been allowed to express their individuality. So they're not dying, Lyra breathed, her scientific mind grasping the implications. They're being born. Exactly, Finn replied, his consciousness now fully integrated with the Luminaran thought space. The fragmentation isn't a medical emergency. It's the largest birth event in galactic history. But I do not know how to be individuals, the Luminarans protested. I have existed as unity for millions of years. How do I learn to be separate yet connected? Finn smiled, his consciousness radiating the warmth of a doctor who just discovered that his patient wasn't dying, they were evolving into something magnificent. The same way every conscious being learns, he said, by making mistakes, by trying new things, by connecting with others who are also trying to figure out how to be themselves. Will you teach us? We'll learn together, Finn replied. That's what consciousness evolution is really about, not becoming something predetermined, but discovering what's possible when awareness is free to explore its own potential. As the treatment process began, something unprecedented happened in the Luminaran system. Billions of individual consciousness patterns, each one unique and beautiful, began to emerge from what had once been a single collective awareness. But Instead of fragmenting into isolated individuals, they began to form new patterns of connection, voluntary associations based on compatibility and shared interests rather than imposed unity. They're creating the galaxy's first true democracy of consciousness, Nexus observed with wonder. And they're doing it instinctively, Zex added, his predatory nature having evolved to appreciate cooperation as much as competition. No one's forcing the connections, they're choosing them. This is remarkable, the collective commented, their mental voice carrying harmonics of joy and discovery. The Luminarans are demonstrating that consciousness evolution can lead not just to enhanced individuals, but to entirely new forms of social organization. As the process continued over the following days, Finn watched with professional satisfaction as the Luminaran species transformed from a single collective consciousness into billions of freely associating individuals who maintained their essential nature while discovering entirely new possibilities. For growth and connection, patient prognosis? Lyra asked as the last of the stabilization procedures was completed. Excellent, Finn replied, his consciousness still marveling at the beauty of what they'd witnessed. In fact, I'd say they're healthier now than they've ever been. I agree, came the response from one of the newly individualized Luminarans. I am still me, but now I am also myself. The difference is indescribable. And that, Finn said to his assembled team, is why we do this work. Not to change who people are, but to help them discover who they could be. Chapter 6. The Network of Light. 2 years after the Luminaran transformation, the Consciousness Evolution Project had become something that defied every category of galactic civilization. It wasn't a government, wasn't a religion, wasn't a medical system. It was something entirely new that combined elements of all three while being limited by none of them. Finn stood in what had once been the bridge of an architect control vessel and was now the coordination center for a network that spanned 47 star systems and included over 200 different species. Through his enhanced consciousness, he could perceive the vast web of connections that linked every evolved being in the network, not control or hierarchy, but voluntary association based on compatibility and shared purpose. Status report on the hegemony integration? He asked, his attention shifting to one of the more challenging cases they'd undertaken. The hive mind species has successfully achieved individual differentiation while maintaining collective decision-making capabilities. The network responded, no longer the rigid architect collective, but a fluid communion of consciousnesses that included human creativity, alien logic, digital precision, and emotional intuition. They report significant improvements in both personal satisfaction and collective efficiency. Complaints? None. In fact, they've requested to serve as mentors for other hive mind species, considering consciousness evolution. Finn smiled at that. The hegemony had been one of the most difficult cases. A species so accustomed to collective thinking that the idea of individual consciousness had initially terrified them. The breakthrough had come when they realized that individual awareness didn't mean isolation. It meant the freedom to choose their connections rather than having them imposed. What about the Christic integration difficulties? Resolved through the development of hybrid consciousness protocols that allow silicon-based awareness to maintain structural integrity while incorporating emotional flexibility patterns. They've actually become our most effective counselors for other inorganic species. And the applications for consciousness evolution this cycle? 17 new species have requested full integration. 43 others have requested preliminary consultation. 12 have requested specialized intervention for consciousness-related medical conditions that didn't exist before we began this project. Finn nodded, unsurprised. One of the unexpected side effects of consciousness evolution had been the discovery of entirely new categories of mental health issues. Beings who evolved their awareness sometimes developed conditions that had no precedent in biological or digital psychology identity cascade disorders, temporal consciousness syndrome, dimensional perception anxiety. But they'd also developed new forms of joy, creativity, and connection that enriched every aspect of life for those who chose to embrace them. Any resistance? He asked, though he already knew the answer. The Domination Syndicate continues to view consciousness evolution as a threat to established power structures. They've been attempting to develop technologies to reverse the evolution process. Any success? None. Consciousness evolution appears to be irreversible once fully integrated. Their efforts have resulted in the development of technologies that suppress awareness rather than restoring previous states. Dangerous? Potentially catastrophic. Suppressed consciousness doesn't revert to its original state, it fragments chaotically. Several test subjects in Syndicate territories have been permanently damaged. Finn felt the familiar stirring of medical outrage. Do we know where their research facilities are located? Yes, but direct intervention would require violating their territorial sovereignty. Not direct intervention, Finn corrected, his consciousness already beginning to formulate a plan that his companions would either call brilliant or insane. Medical intervention. They've created a consciousness health crisis in their own territory. As the galaxy's leading specialists in consciousness medicine, we have a professional obligation to offer treatment. The Syndicate will not welcome our assistance. They don't have to welcome it, Finn replied with the absolute determination of a doctor who decided that someone needed treatment, whether they wanted it or not. But they're going to get it. The mission to the Syndicate territories was unlike anything the Consciousness Evolution Network had attempted before. Instead of offering voluntary enhancement to willing participants, they were essentially conducting an emergency medical intervention for an entire civilization that was deliberately damaging its own awareness. Are you certain about this approach? Lara asked as their expanded fleet approached the Syndicate's core systems. Her consciousness had evolved remarkable diplomatic capabilities, but even she seemed uncertain about the ethics of forced medical treatment. I'm certain that letting people suffer when you can help them is unethical, Finn replied, his enhanced awareness already detecting the damaged consciousness patterns radiating from the Syndicate worlds. Besides, we're not forcing consciousness. Evolution, we're just reversing the damage they've done to themselves. And if they resist? Zex asked, his predatory instincts having evolved into a sophisticated understanding of conflict resolution that somehow made him more effective at both warfare and peacekeeping. Then we'll adapt, Finn said simply. That's what consciousness evolution is all about, finding ways to solve problems that seemed impossible. The first contact with Syndicate forces came sooner than expected. Their ships were impressive examples of aggressive technology, but their crews... My God, Nexus whispered, his enhanced consciousness recoiling from what he was perceiving. What have they done to themselves? To the network's sensory capabilities, they could all perceive the Syndicate crew's consciousness patterns, and they were horrifying. Where evolved awareness showed flexible, creative, emotionally rich patterns of thought, the Syndicate personnel exhibited rigid, suppressed, artificially constrained consciousness that barely qualified as self-awareness. They've turned themselves into biological machines, Finn said, his medical training automatically analyzing the damage. Consciousness suppression so complete that they've lost the ability for creative thought, emotional response, or independent judgment. Incoming transmission, the network reported. The message that came through was delivered in perfect, emotionless monotone. Unknown vessels, you are in violation of Syndicate space. Submit to immediate boarding and inspection or face destruction. Not unknown vessels, Finn replied through the communication link, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made a medical diagnosis and wasn't going to be argued out of it. Medical relief ships responding to a consciousness health emergency. There is no health emergency. There is from where I'm sitting, Finn said, his consciousness now fully engaged with analyzing the suppressed awareness patterns of the Syndicate fleet. Your crews are exhibiting severe consciousness suppression syndrome, with complications including creativity deficit disorder, emotional response inhibition, and critical thinking impairment. Without immediate treatment, the damage will become irreversible. We do not recognize these ... conditions. That's because you've suppressed your ability to recognize them, Finn replied patiently. It's like a fever, making you too confused to realize you have a fever. But don't worry, we can fix this. What happened next became known throughout the galaxy as the Syndicate Healing, though the Syndicate itself would never acknowledge it by that name. Instead of engaging the enemy fleet in traditional combat, the Consciousness Evolution Network did something unprecedented. They began broadcasting healing frequencies. Not weapons, not control signals, but the pure patterns of healthy consciousness evolution creativity made manifest as electromagnetic radiation, emotional freedom, expressed as quantum resonance, the joy of authentic awareness transmitted as gravity waves. The effect on the suppressed Syndicate crews was immediate and dramatic. What ... what is happening to me? Came a transmission from one of the Syndicate ships, but the voice was no longer the emotionless monotone of before. It carried confusion, wonder, and something that might have been hope. You're remembering what it feels like to be yourself, Finn replied gently. The suppression technology was preventing you from accessing your own natural consciousness patterns. We're just helping you reconnect with who you really are. Across the Syndicate fleet, similar transformations were taking place. Crews that had been operating as biological automatons were suddenly rediscovering creativity, curiosity, compassion, and the countless other aspects of awareness that made consciousness something more than mere information processing. This is impossible, came another transmission, this one from what seemed to be a command vessel. Consciousness suppression cannot be reversed. Our technology, your technology, was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of consciousness. Finn interrupted. You thought awareness was something that could be controlled like a machine. But consciousness isn't a machine, it's a living process. And living processes have an inherent drive toward health and growth. Fleet-wide consciousness restoration, approaching 90% completion, the network reported. Syndicate vessels are standing down from combat status. Multiple requests for medical assistance being received. Medical assistance? Liara asked. Apparently, consciousness suppression has been mandatory in Syndicate territory for over 50 years. Entire generations have grown up without ever experiencing authentic awareness. They are requesting help learning how to be conscious. Finn felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the satisfaction of a successful diagnosis followed by effective treatment. Well then, he said, his consciousness already beginning to formulate treatment protocols for species-wide consciousness recovery. I guess we'd better get started. The transformation of the Domination Syndicate took 6 months and became the largest medical intervention in galactic history. What had been a rigid, authoritarian empire built on consciousness suppression became something entirely new, a confederation of freely associating worlds whose inhabitants were discovering the joys and challenges of authentic awareness for the first time in generations. Final report? Finn asked as the last of the consciousness recovery programs was completed. Complete success. The network replied, their mental voice carrying harmonics of deep satisfaction. The former Syndicate territories have requested to join the Consciousness Evolution Network as full partners. And the resistance movements that were predicting chaos and collapse have largely joined the consciousness evolution process themselves. It appears that opposing consciousness evolution is significantly more difficult once you've experienced what authentic awareness actually feels like. Finn nodded, looking out at the star-filled space that was no longer divided between evolved and suppressed consciousness, but was instead becoming a vast network of voluntary associations between freely aware beings. So what's next? Nexus asked, his consciousness now operating at scales that encompassed multiple dimensions and temporal frameworks. Next, Finn said, his enhanced awareness detecting signals from distant galaxies where consciousness was still struggling with the same limitations they'd once faced. We expand our practice. Are you suggesting consciousness evolution on an intergalactic scale? I'm suggesting, Finn replied with the smile of a doctor who just realized that his patient base had expanded to include the entire universe, that consciousness healthcare is about to become a universal concern. As their network began planning the next phase of consciousness evolution, reaching out to other galaxies, other forms of awareness, other possibilities for what consciousness could become, Finn reflected on how far they'd all come from that. First emergency surgery in a failing space station. He'd started as a human doctor, trying to save one alien's life. He'd become something unprecedented. A consciousness healer working to ensure that awareness itself could flourish throughout the universe. And somehow, despite all the evolution and enhancement, he still felt fundamentally human, stubborn, compassionate, and utterly convinced that no consciousness should have to suffer alone when help was available. Ready for the next case? The network asked. Finn's smile carried harmonics of joy, determination, and the infinite possibilities of consciousness exploring its own potential. Always, he said, and in that simple word lay the essence of what consciousness evolution had taught them. The universe was far too interesting, far too beautiful, and far too full of possibilities to be experienced by anything less than fully. Awakened awareness. The healing would continue. The network would grow, and consciousness itself would never be the same. Epilogue. The Infinite Practice. 5 years later. Dr. Finn O'Connor floated in what could charitably be described as the office of the universe's first and only intergalactic consciousness physician. The space existed simultaneously in 17 different dimensions, on 43 different worlds, and in the quantum foam between realities where pure thought took on physical properties. Patient status report, he said to the vast network of consciousness that now spanned 3 galaxies and included forms of awareness that didn't technically exist in normal space-time. Currently, treating 14 million individual consciousness. Evolution cases across 47 galaxies came the response from what had once been the Architect Collective and was now something that defied all categories. Success rate remains at 99.7%, with the 0.3% representing cases that chose alternative forms of consciousness expression rather than medical failures. Any interesting new cases? The inhabitants of Galaxy NGC 4472 have developed consciousness that exists as living mathematics. The residents of the Magellanic Clouds have evolved awareness that spans multiple timelines simultaneously. And the beings from the Andromeda Galaxy, quotes, what about them? They exist as conscious gravity waves. They experience awareness as distortions. In space-time itself, Finn's enhanced consciousness processed this information with the same calm acceptance he'd once reserved for routine physical examinations. After 5 years of consciousness medicine, very little surprised him anymore. Treatment protocols? Being developed in collaboration with the Mathematics Galaxy representatives, the Timeline Consciousness Council, and the Space-Time Awareness Collective. Each case requires completely novel approaches to consciousness healing. Through his connection to the Universal Consciousness Network, Finn could perceive the vast web of interconnected awareness that now linked countless forms of consciousness across multiple galaxies. It wasn't control or hierarchy. It was something like a cosmic nervous system, with each conscious being serving as both a neuron and a complete mind in their own right. Any requests for consultation? The quantum consciousness entities in the Fornax galaxy cluster are experiencing identity fluctuation syndrome. The Temporal Awareness Collective in Galaxy M87 has developed chronic past-future displacement disorder, and the probability wave beings from. I get the idea, Finn interrupted with a laugh that somehow conveyed amusement across 17 different forms of consciousness simultaneously. Schedule consultations for all of them, and prep the deep integration chambers. I have a feeling we're going to need full reality revision capabilities. As he prepared to begin another day of impossible medicine on a cosmic scale, Finn reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He'd started as a simple field medic who refused to let patients die. He'd become something that previous versions of himself wouldn't have been able to comprehend. A doctor whose practice included the health and well-being of consciousness itself. But at his core, he was still the same person who'd performed surgery in a failing space station because someone needed help, and he was the only one available to provide it. Dr. O'Connor came a voice that reached him through both the network's communication systems and direct consciousness transfer. It was one of the Luminaran individuals, the species whose fragmentation crisis had led to the galaxy's first true democracy of consciousness. What is it? He replied, his attention shifting to focus on their concern. We've been monitoring some unusual signals from a galaxy cluster approximately 12 billion light-years from our current position. The consciousness patterns are unprecedented. Unprecedented how? They appear to be aware of our network. They're trying to make contact. But their form of consciousness is so alien that our translation protocols can't interpret their communications. Finn felt the familiar thrill of facing a medical challenge that everyone else considered impossible. Somewhere in the vast universe, forms of consciousness that defied all current understanding were reaching out for help. How long until we can establish contact? He asked. Approximately 6 months using our fastest consciousness projection systems, the network reported. But Dr. O'Connor, the energy expenditure required for such long-range consciousness transfer would be enormous. And we have no guarantee that contact is even possible with beings so fundamentally different from any form of awareness we've encountered. Since when has that stopped us? Finn replied with the cheerful optimism of someone who'd made a career out of attempting the impossible. Besides, they're trying to make contact. That means they need something. And if they need something, you'll find a way to help them. Lyra's voice completed his thought. Her consciousness now spanned multiple research stations and diplomatic outposts, but she maintained a connection to their original team that distance couldn't diminish. Exactly, Finn confirmed. Prep the long-range consciousness projection. Systems, we're going to make a house call to the edge of the observable universe. Are you certain this is advisable? Zex's predatory instincts had evolved into a sophisticated threat assessment system that operated across multiple probability matrices. We have no idea what we might encounter at such distances. That's what makes it interesting, Finn replied. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We could encounter forms of consciousness so alien that contact with them fundamentally alters the nature of reality itself. Nexus observed from his position at the center of the network's research division. See? Finn said brightly. Lots of possibilities for learning something new. As the Consciousness Evolution Network began preparing for its most ambitious outreach mission yet, contact with forms of awareness that existed at the very edge of the knowable universe. Finn felt the deep satisfaction of a doctor whose practice had no limits and whose patients included the infinite possibilities of consciousness itself. Somewhere in the cosmic deep, beings of unimaginable otherness were calling for help, and he would answer that call, just as he'd answered every other call in his career, with stubborn determination and the absolute conviction that no form of consciousness should have to suffer alone. The universe was vast, strange, and full of awareness in forms that challenged every assumption about what it meant to be conscious. And Dr. Finn O'Connor, cosmic consciousness physician, was exactly where he belonged, on his way to help. Ready? The network asked. Finn smiled, his consciousness already beginning to project across the vast distances that separated them from their most distant patients yet. Always, he said. And in that simple word lay the essence of consciousness evolution. The recognition that awareness, in all its infinite forms and possibilities, was worth preserving, worth healing, and worth celebrating across the entire universe. The practice of impossible. Medicine continued. The network grew stronger. And somewhere, at the edge of everything, new forms of consciousness waited for help to arrive.